A strange radio message cuts through static. All dead. I die. A U.S. ship carrying 300 people vanishes without a trace. And a Boeing 737, tracked by satellites and radar, drops off the map in seconds. For more than a century, these disappearances have followed the same pattern. No signal, no debris, no explanation. But what keeps them alive isn't just mystery. It's how we respond when science stops giving us answers. In the years after World War II, when the oceans were still littered with wrecks and secrets, a strange distress signal was picked up off the coast of the Strait of Malacca. The voice was weak, broken, buried in static. All officers, including the captain, dead, possibly whole crew dead. I die. The signal was said to have come from a ship called Ourang Medan, a name that appeared in no port registry, no maritime record, nowhere at all. When a Dutch rescue vessel finally located it, the ship was adrift, motionless, silent. What they found on board would become one of the ocean's strangest legends. The entire crew lay dead, eyes open wide, mouths frozen in silent screams, arms outstretched as if grasping at something unseen. Even the ship's dog was found lifeless, its teeth bared in terror. There were no signs of struggle, no gunfire, no burns, no smoke, only an eerie stillness that clung to every surface. As rescuers went below deck, they felt an unnatural heat. Moments later, smoke began to rise from the cargo hold. Before anyone could react, Ourang Medan exploded, splitting in half and sinking beneath the waves within minutes. No survivors, no debris, no trace. Not a single record of the ship exists, not in Dutch archives, not in British or American naval logs. So what really happened? One theory claims the ship carried chemical weapons left over from World War II, leaking phosgene gas that killed the crew almost instantly. Another suggests carbon monoxide poisoning from a faulty engine, and some journalists at the time wrote that it could have been a smuggling vessel, blown up deliberately to erase the evidence. But others tell stranger stories. Some sailors said the radio transmission contained not just a voice, but another sound, like a cold wind howling through metal. They believed the crew might have encountered something else, a presence, unseen and unexplainable. To this day, no one can prove the Ourang Medan ever existed. All we have are yellowed newspaper clippings, missing documents, and stories retold across decades at sea. Maybe the truth sank with the ship, or maybe it was never real. But Ourang Medan reminds us of something deeper, that the ocean doesn't just swallow ships, it swallows the answers we're still trying to find. On December 5, 1872, a ship called De Gracia spotted another vessel drifting in the Atlantic. No distress signals, no one on deck. As they approached, they could read the name on the hull, Mary Celeste. It was an American merchant ship that had left New York 2 weeks earlier, carrying 1,700 barrels of industrial alcohol to Genoa, Italy. 10 people were on board: Captain Benjamin Briggs, his wife, their 2-year-old daughter, and 7 sailors. When the De Gracia crew boarded her, everyone was gone. The ship looked untouched. Cabin doors open, clothes neatly folded, food still on the table. No blood, no bodies, no signs of struggle. Only one lifeboat was missing, and the ship's chronometer had stopped on November 25th. That raised a simple question. Why would an entire crew abandon a seaworthy ship without warning? When the vessel was brought to Gibraltar, British officials launched an investigation. No major damage was found, cargo intact. Personal belongings still there. Only a few barrels of alcohol showed leakage. From there, theories multiplied. 1. Fumes from the alcohol built up pressure. When the crew smelled gas, they panicked and launched the lifeboat, expecting an explosion, but never made it back. Another. Carbon monoxide or toxic gas caused disorientation and chaos. A third. Piracy or mutiny, but there was no proof. The inquiry closed with no conclusion. No one knows what really happened on the Mary Celeste. When newspapers covered the story, they exaggerated it, calling it the ghost ship of the Atlantic. And that label stuck. But the evidence points to something far simpler. Not ghosts, not curses, just human error and fear. Even so, the image of Mary Celeste continues to haunt maritime history. A ship perfectly intact, drifting with no one aboard, and a mystery that endures precisely because there's nothing left to explain. On December 5, 1945, 5 U.S. Navy TBM Avenger bombers took off from Fort Lauderdale, Florida. It was supposed to be a routine training flight, a simple triangular route over the Atlantic and back to base in about 2.5 hours. But within 1 hour, everything started to fall apart. Lieutenant Charles Taylor, the flight leader, radioed that both of his compasses had stopped working. He wasn't sure where they were. The other pilots tried to use the sun's position for navigation, but clouds blocked the view. Believing they were flying over the Florida Keys, the group turned north, when in reality, they were already hundreds of kilometers east, deep over the Atlantic Ocean. As fuel ran low, their radio transmissions became more frantic and harder to hear. The last clear words from Taylor were chilling. When the first plane drops below 10 gallons, we all go down together. After that, radio silence. The Navy launched one of the largest search operations in U.S. history. More than 300 aircraft and ships combed the area for days. Not a single piece of wreckage was found. Even one of the rescue planes, a PBM Mariner with 13 people on board, disappeared mid-search and was never seen again. Newspapers across the country ran the story on their front pages. How could 5 military aircraft vanish in peacetime, less than an hour's flight from land? Writers began calling it the Bermuda Triangle, a zone where planes and ships were said to vanish without explanation. That phrase would go on to define decades of maritime myth. But when the Navy reviewed the flight records, a more straightforward explanation appeared. Taylor was the only pilot unfamiliar with the area. He had mistaken the Bahama Islands for the Florida Keys, a small error that changed everything. When he ordered the squadron to turn east, he unknowingly led them farther into open ocean until every plane ran out of fuel. Weather reports confirmed poor visibility and strong crosswinds that day, making it nearly impossible for navigators to correct their bearings. And because black boxes didn't exist in 1945, there was no data to reconstruct their final moments. Still, the lack of physical evidence fueled public imagination. In post-war America, aviation symbolized progress and control, so the idea that 5 Navy planes could simply vanish challenged that belief. It was easier and more compelling to believe something mysterious had intervened. That's how Flight 19 became the cornerstone of the Bermuda Triangle legend, not because of what was found, but because nothing was. On March 8, 2014, Malaysia Airlines flight MH370 took off from Kuala Lumpur, bound for Beijing with 239 people on board. Less than an hour later, the plane vanished from civilian radar. No distress call, no emergency signal. It simply disappeared. At that time, the idea that a modern passenger jet, equipped with GPS, radios, and radar tracking, could vanish completely seemed impossible. A massive international search began. 26 countries joined the effort, scanning millions of square kilometers across the Indian Ocean. For weeks, nothing was found. That absence of evidence created the mystery. How could a Boeing 777, one of the safest aircraft ever built, just disappear? Military radar data later revealed something unexpected. After losing contact, MH370 had turned sharply off course, then continued flying for another 6 hours, heading south over the Indian Ocean. Months later, debris, a flaperon, wing fragments, washed ashore on Reunion Island and the coast of East Africa, confirming the crash. But the main fuselage, the flight recorders, and the reason for the disappearance remain unknown. Investigators proposed several theories: a catastrophic mechanical failure, an onboard fire, hijacking, or deliberate action by the pilot. None could be proven. By then, MH370 had become more than an aviation disaster. It was a global media event, one that unfolded in real time across news feeds, social networks, and flight tracking apps. People watched the search as if it were a live investigation they could join. And in that constant stream of updates, a paradox emerged. The more data the public saw, the less certain the truth became. Some blamed governments for withholding radar records. Others claimed the technology had failed, but experts pointed to a simpler reality. Civilian air traffic systems still rely on radar coverage that ends once planes leave coastal range. Over oceans, aircraft must send data manually through satellite pings, and when those stop, there is no precise backup. So MH370 didn't just expose a single mystery. It revealed a gap in the infrastructure that underpins modern air travel, a gap between the technology we assume is infallible and the systems that still depend on human input. 10 years later, that question still lingers. Not just where MH370 went, but how a world so connected could lose it in the first place. On November 28, 1979, Air New Zealand Flight 901 took off from Auckland with 257 people on board. This wasn't a regular flight, it was a sightseeing trip, a one-day excursion over Antarctica designed to let passengers view the frozen continent from the air. The DC-10 would leave New Zealand, fly south to the Ross Sea, loop around Mount Erebus, and return home the same day. Everything went according to plan, until the radar signal vanished. 7 hours later, search teams located the wreckage on the slopes of Mount Erebus, nearly 4,000 meters high. No one survived. At first, investigators blamed the pilots. It was assumed they had flown too low or into a snowstorm. But the black box told a different story. Just hours before departure, the flight's navigation coordinates had been changed by ground staff, and the pilots were never informed. The original route would have taken them over open ocean. The updated one sent them directly toward the mountain. Over the Antarctic ice, the terrain was completely white. Sky, clouds, and ground all blended into one. Believing they were safely over the Ross Sea, the crew gradually descended to give passengers a better view. At 12:50 p.m., the aircraft struck the side of Mount Erebus at 500 kilometers per hour. Everyone on board was killed instantly. The disaster led to major reforms in New Zealand's aviation industry and became a case study in organizational failure, how accidents often result not from a single mistake, but from a chain of small, overlooked decisions. Flight 901 is remembered as a lesson in overconfidence. Technology can calculate perfectly, but humans still have to question the numbers they trust. March 1918. World War I was at its peak. The USS Cyclops, one of the largest cargo ships in the U.S. Navy, departed from Salvador, Brazil, carrying more than 10,000 tons of manganese ore used for wartime steel production. There were 306 people on board. Its route was simple, from Brazil through the Caribbean to Baltimore. But only days after leaving Barbados, the ship vanished without a trace. No distress signal, no wreckage, no oil slicks or floating debris. The Cyclops, over 160 meters long and weighing 19,000 tons, simply disappeared, along with everyone aboard. It remains the single largest non-combat loss of life in U.S. naval history. And because its last known position was inside what we now call the Bermuda Triangle, the disappearance quickly became the foundation of decades of maritime mystery. But before the myths began, the Navy conducted a full investigation. There was no evidence of attack, explosion, or storm damage. Weather records showed calm seas. Officers had previously reported that the ship was overloaded, its hull sitting unusually low in the water. Others suggested that the steel structure, already weakened by years of service, may have failed under stress. The most plausible theory: a sudden shift in cargo caused the ship to list sharply, allowing water to rush in before the crew could react. With 1918 radio technology, a sinking like that could happen in minutes, too fast for anyone to send a distress call. Still, the timing raised suspicions. The U.S. had just entered the height of the war, and rumors spread that German U-boats had sunk the Cyclops. But post-war German naval records contain no mention of such an attack. More than a century later, the wreck has never been located, despite extensive modern sonar searches across the Atlantic. The Cyclops remains one of the great unresolved cases in naval history, a reminder that before GPS and satellite tracking, entire ships could vanish between two coordinates, leaving behind no answers, only the space where an explanation should be. In July 1909, the steamship SS Waratah departed from Durban, South Africa, bound for Cape Town. On board were more than 200 passengers and crew, mostly British settlers returning home after years in Australia. The ship was considered the Titanic of the South, large, luxurious, and technologically advanced for its time. The first leg of its voyage went smoothly, but on the return journey, somewhere along the notoriously rough Agulhas Current, the Waratah vanished. Its last confirmed sighting came on July 27, 1909, when another vessel, the Clan McIntyre, spotted it about 15 nautical miles from shore. After that, there were no messages, no distress calls, nothing. A massive search operation began. 14 ships combed the South African coast for months, but not a single piece of wreckage was ever recovered. Over the following decades, more than 10 expeditions tried again, using sonar, submersibles, and deep-sea imaging, and found the same result: nothing. So what happened to the Waratah? The first theory points to design. Naval engineers had previously raised concerns that the ship's tall, narrow hull made it top-heavy. In rough seas, a sudden roll could have capsized it within minutes. The second theory involves the Agulhas Current, one of the most powerful ocean currents on Earth, known to generate rogue waves up to 20 meters high. If struck by one, the ship could have gone down instantly, sinking to depths that modern technology still struggles to reach. Others, of course, looked for something more mysterious, a so-called Waratah Triangle, a stretch of ocean said to swallow ships along South Africa's southern coast. But no scientific evidence has ever supported that idea. One detail keeps the story human. 2 days before departure, a passenger named Claude Sawyer canceled his ticket, telling friends he had a bad feeling about the voyage. He would become the only person associated with the Waratah to survive, because he never boarded. More than a century later, the ship has still not been found. Its name now stands for a quiet kind of mystery, not one of ghosts or curses, but of how something so large can vanish into a space so vast. For more than a century, from the Mary Celeste to MH370, each disappearance has revealed the same truth. As humans push further into the unknown, mystery doesn't vanish, it just moves. From the sea to the sky, we've built radar, satellites, and digital maps. But there are still moments when the data stops and all that remains is speculation. These stories aren't just about ships or planes that went missing. They're about how people respond to the gaps in what we know. When evidence runs out, we create stories, and every generation builds its own mythology around uncertainty. Maybe the truth is still out there, beneath the waves, or maybe it's the not knowing that keeps both the ocean and us endless.